Hey, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon now. Wanted to take some time, welcome everybody to the latest webinar that we're hosting for our clients, uh, trying to keep everybody up to date on what's happening here in Michigan with the government. And so one of the new developments under this term with Matt Hall's leadership and his speakership has been the development of a very strong oversight committee in the House. And we're very lucky today to be joined by the chair of this committee, Representative Jay DeBoyer. And we're going to discuss some of the new dynamics that are coming about as a result of this, as well as some of the work that this committee's been doing so far. So just a little background about Representative DeBoyer. He's in his second term in the House. He represents the 63rd House District, which encompasses southern St. Clair County and northern Macomb County. Before entering office, he spent 12 years as clerk and register of deeds for St. Clair County. He also served as the Clay Township trustee and supervisor, as well as running a small business, which is incredibly busy. He's, as I mentioned, the chairman of the House Oversight Committee. He also serves as a member on House Judiciary and House Economic Development Committee. He was also elected as a Speaker pro tem for this term, which helps preside over House proceedings, moderating debate among lawmakers, and making rulings on procedure, things like that. But thank you, Representative, for joining us today.
Thanks, Nate. Appreciate you having me.
So just starting from the top here, can you talk to folks for a couple minutes about what the Oversight Committee does and sort of what role it serves as you see it in ensuring, there's some government transparency in Michigan?
Sure. The Oversight Committee, the last few years, we really didn't see a lot of activity out of the Oversight Committee for whatever reason. But the role of the Oversight Committee is essentially to look at government in every aspect, whether it be within the House, whether it be executive branch items, whether it be departments, those kinds of things, and ultimately from the angle of are we operating in the manner in which we should be operating, and are we operating in a manner that is efficient, that is appropriate, and that is designed to best serve the taxpayer and the citizen of the state of Michigan. Oversight can range from anything from maybe looking at an ethics issue within our chamber to offering policy to improve how Eagle might issue permits, right? So it's a giant range of items that could actually come before our committee.
Yeah, well, and you said something interesting there that I want to touch on a little bit later about offering policy recommendations. I think that's something everybody's very curious about.
Sure.
To see where that goes. But sort of besides that, you kind of alluded to this, but it's a little bit more of an empowered committee this
Sure.
go around. So are you able to talk about some of the specific tools or mechanisms that you have in that process that you think are really effective in holding government agencies accountable to things and generating some more of that oversight that we're looking for?
Yeah, certainly. I think we have a tool that was granted to myself or the committee, I guess, as a whole, with the ability to issue subpoenas, to subpoena evidence, documents, to subpoena testimony. We also have the power to put people under oath. We have the power to subpoena individuals to take depositions. And when you look at the totality of the Oversight Committee and what our role is, if we don't have access to facts, if we don't have access to truth, and by the way, as much as we would love to say that, government departments and bureaucracies and entities are more than willing to be helpful, I think probably everybody listening and watching this knows that isn't the reality. So we have to live in, the real world, and we have to provide tools to provide the House with what it's rightfully allowed to do, which is to provide checks on government. whether it be within the legislature, whether it be the executive branch, whether it be, that fourth leg of government, which is departments and bureaucracies. So the subpoena power, the ability to do depositions, the ability to access records, information, is a very powerful tool, which I think you have to treat with respect. As you know, in Lansing, the immediate position that comes out of that is, oh, this is going to be used as a political weapon, right? We heard that immediately. And what I've said to people about that is, that's fine. That's politics. People are going to make that claim. But in my belief and in my position and who I am as a person is the truth is what matters. And I've said to people, listen, say whatever you want, but measure me at the end of the day on my actions and measure me on what I do with that power, because that power can be, it can be corrupted, right? It can be used in a nefarious fashion, but I can tell you that that is not how I'm going to use it. I am going to use it to get to the bottom of and to determine truth, with a hope. And we will talk about this further down the road, I'm sure here, but with the hope to improve the quality of government, period.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, are there any particular areas where you think that quality is needed more than others? I mean, are there certain pieces that you're looking at a little bit more closely than others right now?
Yeah, well, a couple things I guess to bear in mind that are important to realize. You know, there's issues in every facet of government. There really is. Um, there's a whole lot of money that pours into Lansing, a whole lot of money that comes into the coffers of government. And as everyone can imagine, when that happens, there's a whole lot of attention that gets paid to how those dollars are spent, how they're allocated, and where they go. And in any facet of life, there's always going to be people who maybe have a little bit of a less than genuine action, right? Um, so, but we also have a 24-month term, right? So there's almost only so many windows that you can navigate through, just for sheer time wise. So you kind of have to rank those things in an order, and you have to look at them. And as you know, new things will come at us that we weren't aware of initially. But I'll tell you where the biggest issue resides in government. And it doesn't mean there's not multiple issues, like I've said, but the biggest issue that resides in government that I hear about on a regular basis is the departments that you know are able to create rules with the power of law. They're able to swing a gavel with regard to penalty potentially with those rules, and without exception, that's the number one complaint we hear about are those departments that frankly operate relatively autonomously. Yes, legislation does point them in a direction, and yes, directives from the executive branch points them in a direction, but boy, they really can operate autonomously for the most part. And I think sometimes being caught in that bubble in Lansing and in that power that those departments have, I think human nature takes them in a bad direction. And I'm not saying that there's anybody there that's consciously saying, hey, we want to mess with taxpayers and citizens. But I think human nature just takes people in a wrong direction when power is granted to them. And that's the reason for that check and balance. And that's the reason for things like the House Oversight Committee to provide that check. I've had conversations with lots of department heads, and they've all admittedly said that they were nervous about this oversight committee. And I've said to them, you really have nothing to be nervous about, because my goal is not to play gotcha. My goal is not to, cause harm to anyone. My goal is to maybe give a perspective to those departments that they're not thinking about, which is frankly from the citizens and the taxpayers and the businesses back home that are being directly impacted by some of the decisions they're making. So arguably, I would say the biggest issue that needs the most attention is the reining in of the departments that really haven't had oversight for a few years, frankly, from a legitimate oversight committee. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think we've started to see that a little bit. I mean, we had the oversight committee hosting quite a few hearings about Eagle in particular at this point, and it seemed like those conversations were fairly productive, right? It really didn't seem like a gotcha moment as much as a, let's try and work through some of these things that we keep hearing about from constituents. Um,
Mhm.
so are you guys looking to issue policy recommendations related to that or continue those conversations? I guess what are you
Yeah.
thinking the next steps are with those? Because that's sort of where we're seeing a really productive example of this play out right in front of us.
Yeah, I would say that specifically in the Eagle example, I think there's going to be more and further discussion. I would say that, the response that I received specifically out of Eagle on some of our questions was, well, the legislature passes these laws and we're just doing our job. We're operating within what the legislature has instructed us to do. And I think you have to take that serious when they make that comment to us. And by the way, I am and we are the legislature. So, um, it's the old no good deed goes unpunished, right? So you think you're doing something good when you pass a particular statute, but then it's the nuances that actually cause the grief. And I would say that when you consistently get a negative response from the people of the state of Michigan, you definitely have to look at it and you have to address it. So with Eagle, I said to the deputy director that came and testified before us, I said, what's it feel like to be running the most hated department in the state of Michigan? And I didn't even mean that to be evil or to cause him grief. That is how the people feel, right? And I think that if that is how the majority of people feel about their interactions with Eagle, even if they are operating within the purview of what the legislature has said, I think the legislature needs to go back and look at what it is they've done if that's the attitude of the people of the state of Michigan. And so, yes, I do think that you will see policy recommendations come from us. I can't tell you it's going to be next week because I think there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn, things that I just frankly don't even know that I don't know that I'm trying to understand with Depart Eagle. But that theme, Nate, seems to play across a lot of departments. And so we're gonna look at a lot of departments and we're going to ask them pointed questions. And frankly, I don't expect any department to come in and tell me how horrible the department is, right? They're just not going to do that. That's why it's our job to dig into the facts and dig into the details and have testimony and hear from constituents, hear from business owners that use that department on a regular basis, because that is how you make better policy. And that's ultimately what our goal will be with the departments.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and going back to one of the things that you just mentioned a minute ago, um, you haven't gotten to policy recommendations because you guys are yourselves still digging through all this stuff.
Yep.
And your full-time job is to dig into policy and figure out how this stuff can work better. Um, but obviously the oversight committee is intended to ultimately serve the public. So how what kind of steps do you take and what approach are you taking to make sure that the public can understand and have access to these efforts and findings and discussions?
Yeah. So, well, the first thing is obviously there's discussions and investigations that go on behind the scenes. Um, I've been engaged with the elections committee with Rochelle Smith. I've been engaged with appropriations chair Mueller, who deals with the state police. I've been engaged with people that are, whether it be policy or budget, with DHHS. I've been engaged with the Michigan School Board of Education. Um, so, these are all, you don't bring anything out there public until you know what you know, right? Meaning, I don't like, it goes back to the gotcha theory, Nate. I don't like putting stuff out there, from a tactic of, scaring someone or making them think they're a target. I like to we get complaints, we hear about complaints, we investigate those complaints. And if there is something there, we go further and deeper. If there's nothing there, we walk away. And ultimately, policy that'll come out of those actions and the behaviors, they may come right out of our committee. They may get referred over to an appropriations committee that's relevant to that issue. They may get referred to a policy committee that's relevant to that issue. One of the things that Speaker Hall was very adamant about when he structured how our committees run is he wants us all working together. So he wants policy talking to appropriations using the authority of appropriations with allocations of dollars, talking to oversight talking back to policy and appropriations, because it's all three of those tools that you can use to influence the outcome. And if the outcome, again, is to make better government, to make more efficient government, to make a more serviceable government, I do think that's the right structure. So that's, I don't know if you can envision that three-leg stool in our side working together. And we do, Rep. Schutte with the Rules Committee. I think there's a lot of rules that a lot of the people probably watching this and people back home, when they find out they exist, they kind of shake their head because they might be antiquated, they might be old. And then you have new rules coming in with new legislation. By the way, lots of times, I'm sure you've seen this, Nate, that new rules that might directly conflict with old rules, right? So it's about time government gets a little bit of an overhaul, and I'm hoping that oversight plays a big piece of that.
Well, and if I can toss one more sort of piece into that framework that you're talking about, you mentioned this before too. There's sort of these accusations of political partisanship and gamesmanship, things like that. I mean, how do you balance that with doing your job, essentially?
Yeah.
Looking for transparency,
Yeah.
or the flip side, we've seen concerns raised about confidentiality as well. How do you sort of handle that as you go about your business?
Well, I mean, first, the really quick answer is I tell people, measure me on my actions, right? Watch how we handle things, watch how we do things. But, with regard to transparency, with regard to the politics and the gotcha stuff, if people are doing what they're supposed to do, if they're operating within the law, if they're operating within the intent of the law, they really have nothing to worry about. But the problem that exists, especially with oversight, if you default immediately to the gotcha, if I were to do that, right? Or if the people that I'm working with immediately default to a defense position because they believe that that's going to happen, the truth is we're going to accomplish nothing, because they're going to stonewall, right? We're going to come at them. We're going to subpoena. We're going to depose. We're going to bring in testimony. And at the end of the day, who suffers? The recipients of government services, right? So that's the first piece. The second piece on the transparency is that I've said this with people on the committee from, I happen to be a Republican. Obviously, there's a number of Democrats on the committee. I've had this conversation with the minority vice chair. I've had this conversation with other members. And it's simply that when we get to a spot that there's an issue that could debatably be something that would be worthy of not putting out there, maybe it's a trade secret, or, elections would be a great example. Maybe there's a process by which security is created and you don't want it to be known out there because it could cause, a risk. We'll have a discussion. Myself, people from my caucus, people from the Democratic caucus, we'll have a discussion about those issues, and we'll make a decision about that stuff, because we aren't there trying to light people on fire, contrary to popular belief. And if we can establish that trust with the departments, with the executive branch, with other members of the legislature, if we can establish that trust, they will be more willing to come and talk about issues that need to be fixed. And so, that transparency issue is important to me, but at the same time, trust is also important. So you really have to be diligent about the items that you're pushing out there. And I'm going to tell you, if you go political, if you operate solely politically, your credibility is going to be lost. And then once your credibility is lost, Nate, well, forget it. The oversight committee is useless. You can't accomplish anything.
Right. Well, and taking that a step further, you mentioned trying to work together collaboratively, excuse me, with other branches of government. I mean, are there other ways that you're trying to do that besides establishing the trust, or is it still sort of in that trust phase where everybody needs to sort of be able to talk to each other really well and um,
Yeah. I would say that it's still developing if you look back at oversight in the past, like pre this term, um, there were moments that oversight was used rather well. I would say. I would say there was moments that oversight was used politically, and then I would say that there was moments that oversight wasn't used at all. Right. Um, and so right now we're actually trying to rebuild this oversight structure to be a legitimate item. And we have to work through that. We have to work through building that trust. We have to work through um, the legitimacy uh, of our committee, um, because that will help. Because I'll be honest with you, there's good, moral, ethical people on both sides of the aisle, and when something occurs, whether it be under a Republican executive branch or a Democrat executive branch, if something occurs that isn't right, they should equally have the same treatment. They should equally be looked at from a critical eye that is designed to make government better for the taxpayers and the citizens. And so that's what I'm developing with other members across the aisle right now. I'm developing that relationship with them because, as you know, politics has gotten a little sketchy, and the people's first reaction is, skepticism, and that's fine. And it's up to me as the chair and members of my committee. It's up to us to tamp that down a little bit, I guess. Yeah.
well, and how do you see that being received by other folks by folks on the other side of the aisle, or I guess even over in the Senate, if we want to talk about the
Yeah.
other chamber for a minute. I
Yep.
think both chambers kind of like to look at themselves as independent bodies that are in the same building, obviously, but there's some collaboration there too.
Well, I would say that, Senate oversight has a job to do. I don't follow them on a daily, weekly basis. Um, but I would expect that if there's issues, over there that are worthy of looking into further, maybe from our side, our chamber, we would. Clearly, if we decide that there's a policy modification that needs to occur, clearly, I mean, it's going to come out in the House initially, but I would argue that if there's a policy issue that needs to be modified, maybe that discussion should be being had across into the other chamber because maybe they could be offering legislative um, solutions from the Senate as well. Uh, when you see the polling, I laugh at this because it's an ongoing problem. When you look at the polling of the trust of government and the trust of legislature, it never polls high. And I would argue that the reason for that is that people don't see an outcome. They see a lot of talking, but they don't see an outcome. Um, and we've, one of the things that I found to be surprising to me when I came to Lansing a couple years ago was the truth of it is how much of a bubble we are in. And we find ourselves engaged in policy and engaged in practice and engaged in idea that is kind of caught in that Lansing bubble to a degree. And my hope is that if the members of oversight stay focused on how do we make it better for the people of the state of Michigan, we can start to shift that. I don't believe that I'm a magician either, and I'm going to change Lansing, but I do believe that if we can move the needle in the right direction, it can be satisfying at least.
Yeah, yeah, and the bubble it's absolutely a real thing. I mean, I think some folks sort of scoff at it at first, but it's a real thing. I do want to pause quickly for participants that are watching this right now. Just a quick reminder that we do have the Q&A function. So if you guys have any other questions for Representative DeBoyer, we're happy to take those as well. But shifting gears for a minute, Representative. Obviously you're trying to do all this work and trying to get good outcomes. Are you guys measuring those in any ways? Are you using any specific metrics or indicators for sort of, yeah, what we're doing is working and this is, we're on the right path. We just need to keep plugging away at it.
Yeah, I would say that it's relatively speaking, it's early. So we're still we're we're still fully getting our arms around our functionality, although we are rolling. Um, but the measurement to me it is going to be at the as we get further in, let's say towards the end of the first year of this term, where we've been able to totally go through a process, totally go through an issue with the relative, let's say, department, and then come back, perhaps have legislation drafted, um, and moved into the House and then passed out of the House. Um, we don't have any control of whether the Senate passes something or doesn't pass something. But um, again, I would say that that should be the measurement of number one, our motivation, right? If our motivation is to make government better, of course, you're going to have policy disagreements from one side to the other. But uh, that's to me how we're going to measure. Um, there's no shortage of issues in government that need to be dealt with. There really isn't. I get them on a I get phone calls on a daily basis from people with issues, with operational issues in government. And so I would say to measure today, no, I can't give you a measurement today, but do I hope to be able to give you a measurement by the end of this year? I do. Because we'll be able to get through those items in draft a policy, move it into policy, maybe get it passed out of a policy committee and put it on the House floor as a vote for a vote. So that's really how I think we're going to measure. But I think it's also important to say that we should also be measured on our sincerity, right? Measure us on our behavior and our sincerity, because I go back to what I just said a few minutes ago, which is if we go political and if we focus only on political stuff and if we demonstrate that behavior, then oversight committee is irrelevant because it has nobody respects it at that point.
Well, and you mentioned you get a lot of leads, questions, calls from different folks about various things that they'd like to see you address. I gotta imagine that's a little bit like drinking from a fire hose. But I don't know if there's a few top priorities that you're looking at for for this coming session. As like you said, this is sort of a new thing to have it this empowered, and so to a certain extent, you're building the plane while you're flying it. But I don't know if there's a few things that are really sort of standing out to you.
Well, I mean, I can tell you that I think it, like it, I hesitate on this one only because it'll demonstrate politics for you. So the Department of Health and Human Services is I'm rounding a number here, is a $35 billion budget, right? It's darn near 40% or so of the entire budget of the state of Michigan. You'd mentioned when you introduced me that I'm a small business owner. I've been involved in this industry that I'm in for 30 plus years now. And I've always said there's no way that I can do everything perfect when it comes to my business. And I tell customers, I tell people that are involved in the business, if you see something that's going on, if you see an issue, if you see a choice or a decision that's being made that you think could be better done a different way, I want to talk about that. I'm not too arrogant to believe that I know it all, right? And I would argue to say that a department like the Department of Health and Human Services that has such a large budget, there's no way that any of the directors involved or the director at the top know it all, right? And there's going to be issues in something that's of that size. So when we approach departments like that, and I'm not picking on them, I'm just using them as an example. When we approach departments like that and we start to dig and start to question, they have two choices, right? They can either cooperate, believing that our desire is to get a better product, or they can push back and stonewall because they believe it's just going to be political. But if you start with that, if you start just that it's going to be political, you as the person in the department are doing a really big disservice to the users of that department, because what you're saying is nobody from the outside can look at us and be critical in a good fashion, critical in a manner that makes us better. Unfortunately, Nate, that's a theme that I've seen with departments in government, not just since I've been oversight, since I've been engaged in government on all levels. It was that way at the local level, it was that way at the county level, and it's that way at the state level. And until those departments start to go, wait a minute, we're not the smartest person in the world, and there are people out there that can see things we're doing that need to be addressed. Until we can get them to move in that direction, it's going to be hard to make government better for the user. But that's my goal, and I think it's a necessary goal, and I think that my hope is that it's the first step in making the oversight become a real tool to make government better.
Absolutely. Well, we did get a question from a participant. It's going back to the Eagle topic
Sure.
that we touched on earlier. And they're raising the point that Eagle's focused on regulation and not problem solving. Can the committee address this so that the department can better serve the citizens of Michigan? And if you can talk a little bit about how you see that going, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah. So that recognition is exactly right. One of the things I said in my discussions with people from Eagle, I don't remember I said it at the committee or if it was in a secondary discussion, was they've shifted from a service agency to an enforcement agency. And that isn't why they're there. They're not there to be an enforcement agency. And when I have complaint after complaint after complaint after complaint after complaint, that is, great example. I turned in an application for a permit. My application was denied. I asked them what it is that I'm deficient, and they tell me I can't tell you that. Or how do I become, what do I have to do for the application to be accepted? Well, I can't tell you that. What am I not, what category am I not meeting? Well, I can tell you you're not meeting this category. Okay, if I do this, do I meet the category? Well, you can do that and turn it in and we'll review it. That's not service, right? If you don't want me to dig up the wetland mud puddle, right? You need to tell me at least an option for what it is I can do. What can I do here? Here's the goal I want to get to. This is what I'd like to do. If it's a hard no that what I'm asking you is totally impossible and there's no way to work around it, just say to me, there's no way you can ever do that, right? But to string me along by saying, well, we're not a lawyer, so we can't give you legal advice. We can't tell you what you might be able to do. You are fulfilling the prophecy of bureaucracy that is a disaster when you do that. And that's a great point and a great question, because that's exactly what needs to change. We make all these rules, the legislatures pass laws, the departments enact rules, and then when someone's just trying to comply, because remember, they're trying to comply, they're trying to get a permit to do something, and we don't help them. Who's failing? I would argue government's failing. And so, yes, that is one of the long-term hopes that we can push out of oversight into policy is that your role is to help, not to hinder. And unfortunately, you see a lot of hinder because helping actually takes knowledge, right? Helping actually takes understanding. And I'm going to tell you another complaint we get regularly. An individual comes out from the state to do an inspection, and they have no idea what they're looking at. They don't understand it. They don't know what it is. I'm trying to understand how you can do an inspection if you don't understand what you're looking at. And so that tells me that they're not experienced. That tells me that they don't have a grasp of the entire picture of what they're enforcing. And that's a complaint that I get regularly, Nate. And so my hope is that, yes, we can come up with solutions to make us more service oriented.
Well, I think that's all the questions we've got for you, Representative. I really do appreciate you coming on today and talking to all of our clients and us here at Kelly Cawthorne about this. And I think I speak for everybody when I say we're looking forward to seeing what work the committee has in store and coming up, as the session continues. So thank you again.
Nate, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care.